Welcome into the Magnolia Fields podcast, episode 27, in the Richard Schwartz and Associates studio. He's Brad Logan. I'm Frank Dodds. This is the Hotty Toddy edition. Coming off a big win over Oklahoma, and this first segment, we want to talk a little bit about that game, kind of wrap it up. I entitled it "Sooner is Better Than Later."
Yeah.
Poor first half, but some redemption in the second half, I felt.
No doubt. And I think it was a little bit of a reversal of a hangover after the LSU loss. You get a full week to kind of think about it, regurgitate the loss, and then you go to the film room and you get ready for Oklahoma. And they kind of sleptwalk a little bit through the first half. And maybe it was some of the issues that we saw in the latter drive against LSU, but they figured things out after the halftime. And Charlie Wise, Pete Golding, and, of course, head coach Lane Kiffin are some of the best at halftime adjustments. And I asked Lane Kiffin after the game, I said, Coach, you know, what goes into a locker room to make those halftime adjustments? He kind of played it off, and I think he peeled the paint off the wall, to be frank. And then I think they came out and played really well in the second half, well, particularly the third quarter. But I want to make, and I told you this off air during our production meeting, but I really believe that Ole Miss is a different team now. It's a defensive team, and it's almost having to be a defensive team because the offense is not producing. So when Ole Miss went up 2 scores against Oklahoma, Ole Miss just takes the air out of the ball. And people are screaming and teeth gnashing over the fourth quarter. But that fourth quarter, whether folks like it or not, went exactly like Lane Kiffin wanted it to go. Took the air out of the ball, kept the lead, and won the game.
Got the clock running.
Yes. And I think we've used this term a lot after the loss to Kentucky and LSU, survive and advance. And when we talk about Arkansas, it doesn't matter if it's 1 point or 54 points. You win the game. It doesn't matter how you win. It doesn't matter what the score is. Ole Miss has to continue to survive and advance to have a shot at the college football playoff at the end of the year.
Oh, it's all or nothing right now. And we're going to talk about the Arkansas game coming up. That'll be our third segment. And you talked about it's a defensive team.
Yeah.
Lack of running game contributing to that, having to lean on the defense. And those two things travel. Defense and running games travel. Well, right now, Ole Miss just doesn't have that running game.
And we'll get to the injury report in a moment. One of those injuries was Micah Pettis, one of the starting left tackles, or at least he's been starting some. He's been kind of in and out, and that's a problem. Is you got an offensive line that has no cohesiveness whatsoever. That hasn't helped the running back room. Also, Matt Jones has been out, had been running second team. We learned just a few hours ago, prior to recording, that Ulysses Bentley will now be the second team running back behind the starter Henry Parrish Jr. But it's all about the offensive line. That's why I think the running game has not been very good. And then you compound that with an injury to Trey Harris. He did not play at all against Oklahoma. Really didn't need him, but they're going to need him on Saturday against Arkansas. So definitely something to watch. You had issues at wide receiver with Trey Harris being injured. You've had issues not being able to get the ball to the tight ends, Daquan Wright and the starter, Caden Prescorn. And you've had issues in the running back room, the offensive line. Yeah, the offense has had issues, and not to mention Jaxson Dart has not played like the Jaxson Dart we expected to see this season. We expected to see a Heisman Trophy candidate. We haven't seen anything like that so far, although I thought he played really good in the third quarter, and I thought he played really good in the first half against LSU. If we can see that Jaxson Dart show up for a full 4 quarters, that's the Jaxson Dart we expected to see prior to the season.
And what I saw was the offensive line not giving Jaxson Dart a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why he's locked in on his first read, or maybe can come off one guy to the second guy. He can't get that third read in there.
Well, it makes
a difference. There was a play in the third quarter where Prescorn was wide open, but he was the third read, and Dart never got to him because the defense was.
Yes, because he's reading the best he can, and what we're seeing, I think, from Ole Miss on an offensive standpoint, is when you can't run the ball effectively, when you don't have the semblance of a running game that we've at least been able to see over the last couple of years under Lane Kiffin, all of a sudden, when you've got 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers, that turns into 3 down linemen and 2 linebackers, and then a spy on the quarterback, and then the rest are defensive backs. It puts so much pressure on Jaxson Dart. Not to mention, if you don't have an offensive front, you're still getting pressure when the defense is only rushing 3 guys. That puts a lot on your quarterback to make those very quick decisions. And when you talk about quick decisions, that means less reads, going to the number 1 guy, throwing it up to Trey Harris, don't have a lot of time, throw it up to Jordan Watkins. Now I think what we saw, I don't know that the offensive line played near as good as they need to, but in the third quarter, they were serviceable. That allowed Jaxson Dart to run outside the pocket a little bit, do some bootlegs, and they hit Caden Prescorn. And folks will remember the touchdown to Caden Prescorn. He was wide open, and that was his second read. The first read was Jordan Watkins on the post corner. And
that was his second.
Yep, and then he saw Caden Prescorn wide open in the middle. They hit him, touchdown. And that's what we've seen over the last couple of years by a quarterback by the name of Matt Corral. I went back and watched the 22 Arkansas game where Matt Corral had such a big game, and they won with the 2-point conversion, and we all know how that ended. So it was a big game for Matt Corral last year. And then last year's Arkansas game, I thought Jaxson Dart played really well. Look, this team misses Quinshon Judkins. They do. And I think if he is here for Ole Miss, I think it's a different team. Now, they're going to still have those offensive line woes. We did not see Jeremy James except on extra point. Once again, Jaden Williams is out. He did not play with that knee injury. And then Micah Pettis is out. So that's putting a lot of pressure on the two transfers from Washington. And then, of course, Diego Pounce, who's had his issues. He had a huge holding foul in the second quarter that took a first down off the board. So he's had issues. And Caleb Warren, he did not play at all at center. He came in whenever they got on the goal line, but he did not play center. It was all Reese McIntyre. I thought Reese played okay. They've just got issues on the offensive front, and I think that's where things just kind of level from there. If you're struggling at offensive line, you're going to be struggling to run the ball, which means you're going to struggle with pass protection, which means you're going to struggle with your reads at quarterback, which means the wide receivers are going to struggle. It's all one big layer, and it starts with that offensive front.
And you mentioned the term sleepwalking during the first half. It was a 14-10 Oklahoma lead at halftime. You mentioned sleepwalking. 11 o'clock kickoffs. Lane came out publicly wanting some 6:30 home games. He's not going to get it. It's probably too late now. Mm-hmm. But the 11 o'clock game, why is that so bad for a home team? It's because the crowd's not there. Yeah. Is because they're staying at home. We can start
rolling through why 11 o'clocks are poor for attendance and atmosphere. Ole Miss fans, to give them credit, earlier this year, Kentucky, as you know, was an 11 o'clock game. 2 years ago, Kentucky was an 11 o'clock game. It was a huge environment. LSU was, I think, was it 2:30 last year? Or was it 11? I don't remember. It was an early game. It wasn't a night game. It ended, I think, maybe at night, but, I mean, it started kind of during the day. And that's what Georgia's going to be. Georgia was announced at 2:30, so it will end as a night game. But, yeah, it's going to end with begin with plenty of sunshine. Here's the thing. If Ole Miss beats Kentucky, then it may have a chance to get a night game. But anytime Alabama and LSU are going to be matched up in Tiger Stadium, they're going to get that nod. And this year, it's a better game. But if Ole Miss had beaten Kentucky, Ole Miss has obviously they have a very much a right to say that it is a better game for the week. Right now, I don't think it is. But in the old days of CBS, Alabama LSU was always at night, whether it's in Tuscaloosa or Baton Rouge. And then Ole Miss would have been that 2:30 game against Georgia. But this isn't the old days. This is ESPN and Disney, and they're making the call. And real quick, before we go down this hole, and you're right, Lane Kiffin was very upset that Ole Miss will not get one night game, and that's wrong. Mississippi State, they're not getting a conference night game. That's wrong. LSU's already had 2 or 3, and they're going to get a 4th when Oklahoma comes calling in a couple of weeks. It's not fair. Now, do they draw more ratings? I don't know. Maybe they do. But I think as a conference, it's time the conference steps in and say each team in the SEC is going to host at least one night game.
And you think that might be an adjustment they could make next year or in the length of this contract?
Yeah. And is Ole Miss going to LSU and losing at night the reason they lost? I don't know it's the reason they lost. They lost that game because they didn't score in the first quarter when they needed to. That was
one of the top 5 atmospheres ever at LSU.
I was in the press box, and I was looking to a friend that covers Ole Miss with another outlet, and I was screaming at him, and he could not hear what I was saying. On the field at the end of the game, it was so loud that I had to read people's lips. It was like an airplane hangar. I've never heard anything like it. The point is other programs deserve to have that. Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, they deserve to have an SEC night atmosphere, at least more than once or at least once throughout the year. So, Lane's upset about that. But to kind of jump on the other side of this, you beat Kentucky, then you've got a little bit of an argument. You don't really have a lot to argue about standing right now unless you can win the game against Arkansas on Saturday.
Is this an advantage maybe for Ole Miss at Arkansas?
No doubt.
11 o'clock kickoff. Yeah. Now the problems are going to plague the Arkansas crowd, where Ole Miss, the visiting team, is on a business trip.
Yeah,
they're dialed in.
They're screaming in Fayetteville because it's an 11 o'clock game, because Fayetteville is just like Oxford. It's hard to get to in many aspects, not quite as hard as Oxford, but to
Back
get there.
In the day, I took that pig trail once.
Highway 71, yeah. Now they've got Interstate 49 that goes from Fort Smith to Fayetteville, so it's much easier to access. And by the way, I'm excited because the leaves have turned, and everyone I've talked to in Fayetteville have said it's a beautiful drive, so I'm excited about that. And then the food's great, so I love Fayetteville. But I can understand from the Ole Miss standpoint why you would not like Fayetteville, because in the history of the two programs that have been playing football since 1908, Ole Miss is 2-13 in Fayetteville. And one of those, I could argue, should have went Arkansas's way back in 2008 when a phantom pass interference foul alleviated a big pass play for Arkansas under head coach Bobby Petrino. They were going to score, which would mean Ole Miss would be 1-14. But they won that one game. That was Houston Nutt's return back to Fayetteville. The numbers just do not support Ole Miss. As a ranked opponent, Ole Miss is 2-4 against Arkansas the last 10 years. So, and they're, of course, 0-4 as a ranked opponent in Fayetteville because they haven't won a game in the last 10 years. It's a situation to where it's a great game for Ole Miss, but it's one of those games. I just go back to what I said earlier, Frank. You have to win this game no matter what. And we talked before the year, and we talked about Oklahoma. We talked about Arkansas. We talked about Florida. We talked about Mississippi State. If you're going to have a special season, it includes a win over those four teams.
Oh, it's got to be all business. You're on a business trip. You've got to take care of your business.
And so, yeah, real quick, I want to say this too. You talked about the 11 a.m. kick, and it does benefit Ole Miss. The Florida game is also an 11 a.m. kick. And what I was told was that Ole Miss did not want to move their game off the Thanksgiving. ESPN wanted to move it off Thanksgiving. So they bartered, and they moved it to Friday. Of course, we know now Friday at 2:30 is when it's going to kick the day after Thanksgiving. And they allowed Ole Miss to pick a road game time. They picked Florida at 11.
11 to give them extra time to get back and travel. Let's go to our second topic, though, injury updates. Mm-hmm. The two weakest units on this Ole Miss team, the offensive line that we've talked about and the defensive backfield. I don't think there's anything they can do about the defensive backfield right now. Just trust Pete Golding to get pressure where he can, take some of the heat off of them, and maybe some disguise some things. Is there help on the way for the offensive line? You mentioned James. You mentioned Pettis. Any of those guys going to be able to dress out this weekend? You said you just got the injury report.
Yeah, and real quick, I want to talk about that defensive line along with the defensive backfield just for a moment. You made mention that the defensive backfield struggled late against LSU. Thought they really played well against Oklahoma. You know, we didn't see any of those big plays. We saw a couple of busts in the end zone where the tight end got loose. But for the most part, I thought the defensive backfield played really, really well. And I think a lot of that is because Suntory Perkins, who, by the way, SEC co-player of the week, Pooh Paul had a big game as well, the linebacker who's going back to Arkansas to play on Saturday. But the defensive front, J.J. Pegues, Jared Ivey, they're the straw that stirs the drink. And as long as they're getting pressure on the quarterback, that's going to help free up things in the secondary. So goes the defensive line, so goes the secondary. And I think they're getting better because they're getting help from that defensive front. Now, offensive line play, Jeremy James did come back. He did not play on the offensive line. He did come in and play as an up back along with Caleb Warren on a goal line situation. So the question I get asked is why are they not playing on the offensive line? The answer to that question is I don't know. But I do know they're off the injury report. At least they played last week. They may be on the injury report again. They were on it, the updated one I had, but they did play last week. Trey Harris, we talked about him. I don't know. If you ask me right now, I don't believe that Trey Harris goes. I think he's got an injury, a lower body injury, and he's really struggling with that. Jaden Williams, I'll be interested to see if he goes. I was told that he was going to be able to go last week, and obviously he was a last-second decision to not play him. But Caleb Warren, a starting center, he's been able to play ever since Kentucky. Frank, he dressed out for Kentucky, and he hasn't played other than special goal line situations. So it's been Reese McIntyre at center the whole way. And then we talked about the two Washington transfers and Diego Pounds at left tackle. So I would like to see Jeremy James, and I would like to see Caleb Warren back at center. But honestly, the offensive line just hasn't been good all year. And I don't know if they're wanting to keep the flow of who they have. But if they're not very good, then let's give these other guys a shot. But anyway, Caleb Warren is someone that I expected to play much more at center. He has not played, and we'll see what happens in Fayetteville on Saturday.
Before we go to our third topic, let's take a break. We'll be right back on Magnolia Fields, episode 27, the Hotty Toddy edition, right after this.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, you know who to call. Call me. Remember, one call, that's all.
Welcome to the Richard Schwartz and Associates Magnolia Field Studios. One call, that's all.
Once again, welcome back into the Richard Schwartz and Associates studio. He's Brad Logan. I'm Frank Dodds. Our third topic, what to expect. We've got two big games before you and I get to see each other again in the studio. At Arkansas, you've talked about it a little bit. They come in fifth in the SEC in scoring offense. Got a little bump last week down here locally in the Starkville area that may skew those numbers a little bit. They're 13th in scoring defense.
Really good.
In the SEC.
Yeah. SEC.
The SEC standings only.
Yeah. It's this game opened as a 9.5-point Ole Miss favorite. Quickly dropped down to 6.5. But oddly enough, Frank, this thing settled around 7, and we'll see if there's any movement. I expected this thing to come closer to 3, which tells me that Vegas knows something. But if you look at the number, the betting odds in this game, Lane Kiffin is really good on the road following a loss. In fact, you have to go back to Florida Atlantic to where he lost back-to-back road games. So preparation is going to be key in this. And preparation is going to be really key because Arkansas is going to be without its starting running back, Jaquindon Jackson, we think. Sam Pittman said earlier this week that he's going to be doubtful. But Braylon Russell ran all over Mississippi State, and they ranged up 58 points on a very poor Mississippi State defense. But Braylon Russell is a talented running back. We've seen players like Rocket Sanders have career days against Ole Miss in Fayetteville. Crazy things happen in Fayetteville when Ole Miss goes up there. It just does.
It happens in Oxford when Arkansas is in town, too.
You're right. I mean, the games are always insane, but usually the games in Fayetteville always go Arkansas's way. At least some have went Ole Miss's way the last couple of years. We did learn that tight end Ty Washington and Varkey's Gums have left the program. And then Jalen Braxton, the starting cornerback who was all freshman SEC last year, he's not going to play on Saturday. So they don't have a very lengthy injury report. But at the end of the day, it's going to be, low 70s, high 60s, and like a 75% chance of rain. We haven't had rain in Mississippi, it feels like, in 3 months, except for when the hurricane and the depression came through. It's a situation where Arkansas had a big win over Tennessee at home a couple of weeks ago. Prior to that, Frank, I've had so many people in the state of Arkansas tell me they had not had a good home win since 22 Ole Miss. And that just tells you that Ole Miss just somehow forgets to play football when it crosses the Mississippi River Bridge in Memphis. So what happens at the game on Saturday? I know you made mention of this. Where do we think this game goes? I think Ole Miss wins a close one. I think it's close, and we'll talk about the remainder games in the SEC. But I do think Ole Miss wins this. I think it does find a way to score against an Arkansas defense that's not great. In fact, I think Oklahoma may have a better defense than Arkansas. You look back, and I rewatched the Mississippi State-Arkansas game. Mississippi State should have scored in excess of 40 points. They left so many points. They left 21 points on the field.
No doubt.
A Ferry field goal is missed. And they ended up scoring, 24 points. So they left so many points on the field. I think this Arkansas defense is not great. Once again, this is a crazy series, and crazy things happen.
Ole Miss scored 26 last week at home against Oklahoma. Does 26 points win it?
No. I think one quick thing, too. In the 4 wins the last 4 years, Arkansas and Fayetteville has scored at least 30 points in each game. In those every game in Fayetteville that they played the last 10 years, which has been 4 games. Ole Miss won the game in 2018, I believe, in Little Rock when Matt Luke was the head coach. Ole Miss actually has a really good record in Little Rock against Arkansas. They have a terrible record in Fayetteville. We've already talked about that, 2-13. But I think if Ole Miss can somehow get some offensive line together, I just think Dart's going to have a huge day throwing the ball because the Arkansas secondary is not great. And if they can get separation and continue to do what they did in the third quarter, I like Ole Miss's chances. But they roll out the ball and play like they did in the first half, fumble a punt return, and not play well on offense, it could be a long day for Ole Miss.
Then you got Georgia coming to town. 2:30 game. They've been beaten this year.
And if you want to hear something crazy, Frank, on my podcast I said that if Ole Miss beats Arkansas, it's going to run the table.
Crazy.
And I stand by that.
Crazy.
And
It's Halloween. It's okay. We can be a little crazy.
Let me tell you a little bit of the method to the madness. I think if this team right now it sits at 6-2, 2-2 in the conference, if it can get to 3-2 in the conference and 7-2, I mean Georgia's going to be a 6.5 point favorite.
You would think
maybe a little bit less, maybe a little more, depending on what happens on Saturday. But if Ole Miss does what it's supposed to do, wins the game 31-17 over Arkansas, beats them a couple touchdowns, I think there's a renewed interest in the program. I think it's going to be the biggest game in Oxford since 03 LSU, and I think it's going to be, a wild atmosphere. On the flip side, if you lose the game, the season is over. Now Lane Kiffin has to keep his roster together. He has to try to keep people from not opting out.
Yep, not participating, blaming injuries, whatever.
Yes.
I agree with you.
And so that's why this game's so important, and that's why I believe Ole Miss wins, because I believe that Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weiss, and Pete Golding will scheme the heck out of Arkansas. Don't remember, the offensive coordinator at Arkansas is really good.
I was just about to mention
Bobby
him.
Petrino is one of the best schematic offensive coordinators in the country, and Taylor Green, their quarterback, has been playing really good over the last couple of weeks. But that Ole Miss defense is one of the best in the country, and he's got his hands full. I think Ole Miss wins a close one, and I think they gear up and they run the table. I think they beat Georgia the next week, and then if you get to 10-2, I think Ole Miss can make the playoff. Right now, ESPN projects if Ole Miss finishes 10-2, there's a 72% chance they make the college football playoff.
This is the log jam that we warned everybody about on our very first show.
We talked about it. All these two-loss teams.
You're going to have half a dozen 6-2 teams. And it's going to come down to style points. Who did you beat? Who did you lose to? And that Kentucky game,
oh gosh, it just jumps
keeps
out.
getting bad.
And it may actually keep Ole Miss out of the playoff.
It could. A home loss against a team. This is their only SEC win.
Yeah, but it's going to be a war on Saturday. It's going to be fun for non-Ole Miss and non-Arkansas fans to watch, because I think it's going to be back and forth for a while. I think Ole Miss kind of stretches it in the fourth quarter. I really do. And here's the thing. Ole Miss is going to have to throw their running backs open. And what I mean by that is they're going to have to come out and solidify the passing game. That's going to open up that Arkansas defense, and that's going to allow them to run the football more effectively. I think Ulysses Bentley, I know you've heard this before, and don't jump through the television at me or your listening device at me, but I think Ulysses Bentley has a big day in Fayetteville. Eventually, if I say that, it's going to come true.
My hope is that they're not running away from them in the fourth quarter, that they jump on them in the first half.
Yes.
And take Arkansas out of the game. Take advantage of that 11
like they should have done against LSU.
Right. If they take advantage, they play a first half, but with the points, like they did at LSU.
Go up 24-0.
Yes.
Game's away.
24-7.
But if they go up 10-0 after dominating the first half, that's not good enough. And then the halftime's 10-3 or 14-3. Not good enough.
Now, we're going to take one more break before we wrap up. Episode number 27 of Magnolia Fields will be back right after this on the Max South Sports Network.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, you know who to call. Call me. Remember, one call, that's all.
Welcome back to the Magnolia Field Studios, brought to you by Richard Schwartz and Associates. One call, that's all.
Welcome back to the Richard Schwartz and Associates studio. Brad, Logan, Frank Dodds with you. Topic number 4. Other games. This has been our recurring theme. We kind of dubbed it Franco's Fabulous 15 games that you needed to watch to get the landscape of college football and the CFP and who might go and who might not go. This weekend, November 2nd, none of these games made the list. Ole Miss Arkansas may be the game, and before the season, we didn't circle it.
I'm going to tell you who might be the game. Talk about that 11:45 game on the SEC Network.
Which one is that?
Auburn and Vanderbilt. Tell me your thoughts on that game.
Yes and no. Auburn's a favorite. I don't get it.
Diego Pavia has the recipe to beat a Hugh Freeze team. He beat them. Was it New Mexico or New Mexico State that he was at? One of the schools. But he's got the recipe to beat a Hugh Freeze team. Although I thought Hugh and Auburn played much better against a very, very. I don't know if Kentucky's given up or not, but their give a darn button just meter does not seem to be registering right now.
It might be a good game, but it's not going to impact the CFP.
Oh no, it's not.
And that's it didn't get circled. We're off for 2 weeks, so we have to look ahead to November 9th. And you've already talked about the two games. Ole Miss and Georgia, Alabama and LSU.
If Ole Miss wins on Saturday against Arkansas, I think they beat Georgia. I don't care what the line is. Take the money line. If they lose to Arkansas, I think there could be an argument they lose the rest of their games. That's how volatile it is. And someone told me that is very, very entrenched into college football and covers a lot of different programs. They said, when you go as heavy in the transfer portal and you get as much invested as Ole Miss is with the Grove Collective, and you're walking across that high wire, the highs are really high. But if you lose your balance and lose a player or two, the lows could be really low. And so you try to avoid that. And you avoid that by doing one thing, winning. That's why I think Ole Miss game plans really well, because I think Lane Kiffin and that staff understand how catastrophic it would be to lose the game.
Well, Missouri's suffering from that right now, too.
They are.
Quarterback gets knocked out. And so I think you're spot on. I'm not going to argue with anything you've said. All starts with Arkansas, then Georgia. Other games to watch this week. Vandy, Auburn might
from
be
an entertainment value. I think it would be good, but no, it has no bearing on the college football playoff.
No, and I mean I don't think A&M struggles at South Carolina. Some people are calling that out.
I think you might need to watch that one because Shane Beamer has been able to get his teams up at certain times of the year. He got them up for Oklahoma, and I think he may get them up for A&M. But I think A&M has too much talent. I mean, if they can't stop,
and now coaching.
Yeah, I mean, if they can't stop, all these teams they face, if they can't stop Nussmeier and Jaxson Dart, why in the world can they stop a running quarterback like Marcel Reed and what we saw him do last week? I think the team to watch is continue to be A&M.
I do too.
If they can continue to win and they beat Texas, they're in.
They may have a rematch in the SEC championship.
I think they very well could. But watch Texas though; they've got some games coming up, and I'm not so sure how good Texas is. Here's a fun game next week that people need to watch, and that's Alabama and LSU. Kind of a college football playoff play-in game.
It is.
But I'll tell you what, more than it is in anything, I think it's an audition for Brian Kelly and Kalen DeBoer on how much heat is on either one. Because those two programs are not going to deal with multiple losses. 3, maybe even 4 losses. And if Alabama goes to LSU and loses, I'm going to tell you what the games you need to circle. You need to circle that Auburn game. Because if there's one thing Hugh Freeze can do, he can scheme at least 1 or 2 games a year. I've seen it done when he was at Ole Miss, when I've seen him scheme Alabama. I've seen him scheme Mississippi State. That's a game to watch. And if Kalen DeBoer goes 8-4 and loses the Iron Bowl, I don't care what the buyout is.
He's going to start losing his fans.
Yes, he is. So that's a game to watch next week is how much does Kelly and DeBoer have.
Real quickly, in less than 30 seconds, basketball. Nice start in an exhibition game against Illinois on
John
Sunday.
Rothstein for CBS Sports is already talking about Ole Miss as a team to be watching for the Final Four. And, some crazy things are being talked about. It was the first time the team was ranked in a while. The SEC schedule is brutal, but you know what? It's brutal for everybody.
Yeah.
And they've got some great home games, and we'll get into that the next time we get together. We'll talk a little bit about some of those home games. It's going to be a fun year for both the Ole Miss men and women. Coach Joe, they beat Christian Brothers by like 100-28 or some crazy number. So they've definitely got some talent this year.
We thank all of you for joining us here on Magnolia Fields, episode 27, the Hottie Toddy edition. Until next time on the Max House Sports Network.